Today on Perpetual Projects, we are going to build a twin stick shifter for our CJ7 project. Now, our project has a Dana 300 transfer case, but this process should be pretty similar and work. Exact same parts aren't gonna work, but similar parts will work for a Dana 20 or an MP205 transfer case. And to my knowledge, that is the only transfer cases that allow you to do a twin stick setup. So the reason that we're gonna do a twin stick setup is because our current shifter does not clear the floor, and that's because we have, well, it's because of a lot of reasons, but the main ones are we have a XJ and a CJ and a YJ and a ZJ all combined into a piece of Jeep, and this shifter just, it doesn't fit. So rather than spend a bunch of time and effort to try to make this shifter fit, I figured it'd be just as easy to make a twin stick setup. So the way the original shifter works is on the transfer case, which the transfer case is in the Jeep. So we're gonna do this on the bench and then we'll show you in the Jeep. You have two rods that shift the front and the rear axle independently. Both axles can be shifted into low range, neutral, or high range. So normally your shifter would go one way and it would shift both rods into low range. That's for low. Then you go a little bit further or go back the other way and you have neutral, puts both axles in neutral. You go a little bit further and one side goes into high range and that's too high. A little bit further and the other side goes into high range and that's for high. What a twin stick shifter does is it separates those and gives you two shifter handles. One, I know it's ugly, but it hopefully won't be when we're done. Two, and so then we'll have one that will shift the front axle, either low range, neutral, or high range, and the other axle either low range, neutral, and high range. So basically, it just gives you complete control of your transfer case. So if you wanted just front wheel drive for some reason, you could have just front wheel drive. I'm not a big off-road guy, but I know that it's desirable for off-road vehicles, and I know I can build it, so we're gonna do that. Now they sell twin stick setups that work great, and they range from, I think the cheapest one I saw was like 120 all the way into the $400 or $500 range for a dual cable twin stick shifter, which would be awesome. They're made for applications that these transfer cases came in, and this combination was never made. So we would have to modify whatever we bought anyway, and if we have to modify it, why not just build it? So what we're gonna do, we're gonna use 3/8 plate to make the pivot for our two shifter sticks. Then we're gonna use 1/4" plate to make the arms. So take this shifter for example. This arm goes to, this actually looks like 5/16, but this one's 1/4 and this one's like 1/8. We're gonna do 1/4 for all of them. We're gonna make a pivot like something like this that bolts to the original pivot point for the transfer case out of 3/8 plate, and then we'll have an extended pivot that's probably gonna be out and up from the original pivot, and we'll build levers out of the 1/4" plate that will actually actuate the shifter rods on the transfer case, and then these shifter sticks will be bolted to those levers or welded probably to those levers, and that's what's gonna allow everything to work. So let's go take a look at the Jeep and see what we're gonna do. All right, so here's what we're working with. We've got our original pivot point for our shifter, and the way this worked is there was a rod that went through here, and then the shifter actually attached on the outside of this lug. Well, as you can see, the floor is in the way. So what we need to do is move this shifter forward and up a little bit so that it's somewhere around there, the pivot point. And then once we get the pivot point where we want it, we can make our 1/4" levers so that one goes down and has a linkage attached to this shifter rod here, and the other one goes to the other shifter rod that is back here. One is front, the other is rear. And then the two sticks will move independently and move those shifter rods in and out to choose our gears. The first thing we need to make is the piece that's gonna bolt on to these lugs and come forward and move our pivot point up where we want it. Okay, I think you can get a better view of what's going on here from down here. If you look, you can see right here are two shift pins. They're like not really a fork, it's just a pin that goes through there and moves in and out. And then here's our original pivot point what we've done is we've built a bracket out of 3/8 plate that comes out, moves over to clear the floor, and comes forward so that we can put our pivot out here about where we were pretending it was when we were on the top side. So I'm just test fitting this bracket. It fits tight against the back of that fork in the original pivot so that it doesn't have, once it's tight, it's not gonna have any movement at all. So it'll be nice and rigid. Then we just have to build 2 arms that get our forks so that we can put a linkage between here and our fork somewhere down here. I'm gonna go ahead and pull that out, drill the hole in it, get it cleaned up and painted, then we can install that permanently and start building our shift arms. Okay, right now we're waiting for our bracket that bolts onto the transfer case to dry. So we're gonna go ahead and cut this handle off of here, and I need this to be straight. It's gonna end up probably being bent a little bit, but it'll be easier to start with it straight and then bend it to the shape that we need. My plan is just to heat it up and try to bend it. We'll see how that goes. All right, that's hot. It's gonna be hot for quite a while. It's not perfectly straight. We can go back and adjust it some after we get it in there and figure out exactly where it needs. It's gonna need to be bent some. I just wanted to get the majority of this out. That'll make it easier for me to clean up so I can paint it and everything. So now it's time for another coat on our bracket. Okay, now you can see we've got our bracket bolted in, our holes drilled for our pivot point. And that 5/8 bolt is a tight fit, and then on top of that, that bracket is bottomed out against the back of that original shifter bracket, so it's not going anywhere. It's nice and solid. It doesn't move at all. Now we need to start building our linkages, or our, I guess linkages, I don't know what you call them. But so this one is gonna sit on the outside here. It's gonna come down just below the body here, and then it's going to angle over at probably about a 45 and then drop straight down, and then there'll be a short bar that goes between here and here to allow for pivot. I'm going to get some measurements and start getting that one bent up. Once I get that one in here, we'll take a look at it and then see what we have to do for other linkage. So guys, when you're trying to test fit a piece and it's 1/4 inch plate, a 1/2 inch, 1.5 inch wide, and it's really hard to bend it, and you're trying to get it in somewhere where this piece fits, just use a piece of welding wire and you can get all your bends so you know where to bend it, and you have a pretty close pattern of what's gonna fit where you're putting it. There you go. The wire is not completely bent on the same plane, so it's a little crooked this way, but that follows the contours almost exactly of what we had. Now we just got to test fit it in the Jeep. All right, well, we got our first linkage. It's not painted or finished or anything. I still need to do a little bit more clearancing up here. We're obviously gonna have to put a shifter stick on it, but that's neutral. That's the front axle in high. Real nice. Okay, after much adjusting, we now have everything working the way that it should. It's kind of hard to see from this angle, but we've got our 2 levers. That inside lever, I had trouble getting it in my bender, so I had to use a little bit of heat to make that top bend the first time, and then I had to straighten it out, and then I had to bend it again, and so it's got a little bit of a funny shape to it, but it's gonna be just fine. It's gonna be under the floor, you'll never see it. But so right now we have both levers all the way forward, and that is low range on the front and the rear. So then if we grab this lever, this should shift the rear into neutral. Now we're in 2-wheel drive or front wheel drive, low range. If we move this one back, now we're in neutral. So right now we're in neutral. If we move this shift lever forward, that is rear wheel drive, low range. If we move this other lever over here forward, now we're in four wheel drive, low range. We can move this one back and we have front wheel drive, low range. We can have rear wheel drive, high range, and four wheel drive, high range. So the last thing that we have to do to finish getting our shifter mocked up is this one here. After all of the adjusting and changing, ended up being a little bit too long, so I'll cut that one off, and then I've got to mount my shifters on there. I'm gonna go ahead and do that, and since I'm gonna be welding and I don't want to get sparks on the camera, and I'm filming by myself today, I'm gonna go ahead and do that, and I'll come back and show you what it looks like with the shifter rods attached. All right, there is our shifter rods all attached. They're not exactly the same angle. The one that I had to straighten out from that 3-speed shifter, just I couldn't get it completely straight. Once it's all painted up, I don't think anybody will ever notice. Once I get this all welded up, I might try to straighten these out a little bit so they're a little bit closer together at the top. And this part here is more straight. I have seen some of these that they come way up here and just bend out at the very top. And I kind of like that, but these are just too hard to bend to get. I can't get it completely straight, and it's just gonna look goofy. I've done a lot of work to get them as straight, to get this one as straight as it is, and this one I just used with the factory bend that was in it. So I'm not gonna mess with doing that, but you could if you wanted to, especially if you got new rod, you can buy this. This is just like 1/2-inch rod, and you could drill the end of it and weld a bolt in the end of it for your shift knob to attach to. But since we weren't buying any, we were using what we had, I'm just gonna go with the bend that I've got, and I might try to close this gap up here just a little bit. Remember, we have to get an automatic shifter somewhere next to this in order to shift our transmission. So I'm gonna pull all this out, get it all cleaned up, and get it all painted, and then we'll reinstall it and show you what the final product looks like after it's all said and done. I can't remember if I showed you guys what I built these little linkages out of. I mean, that's what they do. They link this to the other, so they're a linkage. They're not adjustable or anything. They're just a piece of 3/4 wide by 1/16 inch steel, and I just put it in the vise and twisted it. Drilled a hole on each end, and then bolted it here with the 1/4 inch bolt. And these aren't tight, but they're nylocks, so they shouldn't back off. And then just a pin drops through on the transfer case side, and that just fits down inside that shifter pin on the transfer case. I did go ahead and get these all welded up, and as you can see, I kind of bent the tops so those shifters sit a little bit closer together, and the spacing's not exactly right. It's probably going to be a little bit wider than that, but I really like the way these turned out. Went ahead and sandblasted them, and I'm just going to throw a quick coat of paint on them. It's finished, guys. So it turned out really, I mean, way better than I was expecting. Everything lines up good. We've got a good angle here. I did move these closer together like I said before. It all clears each other. We can shift into all the gears. It turned out absolutely great. I couldn't be happy with how this turned out. Now, if you don't know what a twin stick shifter is, we've kind of been talking about it, but now I have the opportunity. I have one, and I can actually show you what it does. So this shifter is going to control our rear axle, and this shifter is going to control our front axle. Now, there is an interlock in this transfer case that won't allow you to go into front wheel drive high range, and you can take it apart and take it out, but for our purposes, it's just not, we're not going to do that. But we can go to 2 high, we have 4 high, and then we can go back to 2 high, neutral, so if you wanted a flat toe or something, you can put the transfer case in neutral. Then we have 2-wheel drive low range, which is a new option that this didn't have before. You couldn't have rear wheel drive low range. We can have 4 low, and then we can also shift the rear axle out, and now we have front wheel drive low range, which is another new added feature, and you just have a lot more control of your transfer case using this twin stick setup. And it was a simple build. I know I used the press brake, but I also used the torch, And the vise, I actually broke my vise, but that's beside the point. But you don't have to bend these rods. You could cut and weld them together. You could find pieces that are bent. It doesn't have to be pretty crisp bends to make it work. It's all under the floor, and Jeeps were pretty crude to begin with. So if you just get something that doesn't run into something else, it's really not that hard of a build. And if you have an off-road rig and you have a transfer case that allows it, I think it's worth doing. We've got less than 20 bucks in this. It's built out of small scraps that we had laying around, and most of that was bought for other projects or on the cheap anyway. We have that metal shop where we get drops and we can buy them by the pound, and there's only a couple pounds worth of stuff in here. The shifter is one of the original shifters, and the other one is a 3-speed shifter that we found laying on the ground somewhere. So you really don't have to spend a lot of money to have a nice twin stick shifter to have complete control of your transfer case. I hope you guys have enjoyed. We'll see you soon.